Tonight's sponsor is Chana Bat Friedel in merit of Reisler to become a Kala, and for the whole Lipszyc family to have good health, happiness, peace, and wealth, and that her tests should come out good. And for the Refuah Shalema of Menachem Mendel Ben Sarah Batya and Aventura FL Bat Reisel.
Thank you.
There's another one.
Okay.
That's the same thing, but then there will be other people. And then Shem Tov,
Shem Tov, or for Shlema for Shem Tov,
Ben
Ben Frach. Okay.
He's in the hospital as we
This
speak.
is a way.
Okay. Oh, Alan, yes, Alan and Ella Licht, in honor of the upcoming wedding of Benji Licht and Sarah Mizrahi, Baruch Hashem. And for the Refuah Shlema of Menachem Mendel Ben Sarah Batya and Dvorah Feiga Bat Reisel. So also on a personal note out there, thank you Ma, and thank you Alan and Ella. Okay, so to introduce the modern issue that we will be talking about today, I want to share with you a story. Once there was a fine, pious, and very poor Jew who every day would pray and pray, asking God, begging God, please let me win the lottery. He had a family and he was in poverty. And the hearts of the angels would literally melt from this person's prayer. Until one day they finally asked God, God, why aren't you answering this man's prayer? And God said, I would, if he would only stop nudging. What does the word nudging mean? Nudging is Yiddish. So let me tell you, for those who are not familiar with the word Yiddish, I took this definition from the wordsmith.com. So it's from the Yiddish word nudyin, which means to pester, to bore someone, which comes from Polish nudzik. Okay? The word developed a variant spelling nudge under the influence of the English word nudge. It's a cousin of this word. A cousin of this word is nudnik, a boring pest. So what's happening here? What is this metaphorical story telling us? Hashem doesn't answer the prayer because we nudge. Were we to stop nudging and start praying, our prayers would be answered. What does that mean? What is this story that they tell? What is it telling us about what we're doing wrong in our prayers, which is the reason why they're not being answered? What is it telling us about what we need to change in the way we pray in order to have our prayers answered? This lecture is going to explore precisely the answer to these questions based upon a mystical teaching of the Rebbe, which the Rebbe of Blessed Memory delivered on this Shabbat in 1964. So, heads up. The title of this lecture is called May the Force Be With You, Letting God's Blessing into Your Life. And I told you that the modern issue that we're going to be discussing is, what are we doing wrong with our prayers? What does it mean to nudge versus to pray? And were we to stop praying and stop nudging, our prayers would be answered. However, I want to share with you that the heart of this class, before we get back to this issue, you're not going to hear me say a word about prayer. I'm going to take you to an entire different mystical concept which talks about the holiness. And then we're going to get back to prayer. So, that leads me to another introduction. Besides the story of the nudging, I want to share with you another story, another introduction, that this week we read 2 Torah portions. And there's a whole reason why. I don't want to take up time, but just that you know, there are 54 Torah portions, which we count as 53 because Netzav and Vayelech is always together. But be that as it may, we don't always have 54 Shabbatot in which to read all the portions. And we have to finish the entire Torah by Simchat Torah. So unless you have a leap year, then you have an extra month, an extra 4 or 5 Shabbatot. And if you don't have a leap year, plus you have to minus the Shabbatot that are on the holidays. Because on the Shabbat of Passover, you didn't read the weekly Torah portion. You read a special Shabbat Passover portion. So therefore, we have to double up portions. And the way we double up portions also helps us set up certain portions before certain holidays. So last week was a double up, this week's a double up, because we do have to read 2 Torah portions before the holiday of Shavuot, which is the famous Bechukotai and the counting of numbers. So that's why we double up. But let's get back to what we want to talk about. The second Torah portion begins with the following commandment. It's a commandment that tells us we are to be holy. Let's read the exact words of the verse. Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. Simple, right? We have a commandment to be holy. What does that mean? What exactly, on a practical level, what does that mean? So, let's first go ahead and define the word holy. Step number 1 of the definition of the word holy. The word holy means godly. When I say that a person, place, or thing is holy, what am I saying about it? It's godly. Let's talk about when Jacob wakes up from the dream with the ladder and the angels. And what does he say? Oh, I did not know that this place is holy. And what did he mean when he said this place is holy? He meant to say that there is the revelation of God's presence in this place. What does it mean when we say an object is holy? We're saying that this object now became godly, such as the Sefer Torah, which is made up of parchment, has become godly because it's become the carrier of the Word of God. What does it mean when we say a human being is holy? Jewish people don't have saints. So what does it mean a person is holy? We refer to it. One of the people, right? People that actually carry the name holy with them. For example, in the times of the Talmud, the one who wrote the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, he's known as Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Holy One, the Holy Rabbi. There's another person who we always refer to, the Sephardic great commentator, the Or HaChaim, Reb Chaim Ben Attar. He's always called the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Amongst the Hasidic groups, all the students used to refer to the Ruzhana, the Holy Ruzhana, the Heilige Ruzhana. What do you mean when you call people holy? How can you call a person holy? Especially if I just told you that the word holy refers to God. The answer is that just like with the place and just like with the thing, when a person has nullified, subdued his own egocentric paradigm, feelings, thought, speech, and action, and he has become an embodiment of the Word of God, which means the Torah. Not that he tells you, God just told me. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what happens amongst the Jewish development of the Torah. But when you see that all his actions can become a source of knowing what the book says to do. Because this man or this woman, their paradigm of reality, of the world, their emotions of love, fear, compassion, their thoughts, speech, and action has become transparent to exactly what the Code of Jewish law tells them to do. On top of this, a person reaches a level of godly intuition. However, I do want to note that in the Jewish belief, a godly intuition can never be in contradiction to the word of Jewish law, because then it's not godly intuition. Okay? If we believe that God gave us the Torah and commanded us on the Jewish law, God's not going to give you an intuition to disobey the Jewish law. But when a person becomes so transparent that his actions, his emotions, his feelings really is the embodiment of what God is telling us as Jewish people in the Torah to do, such a person has reached the status of holy, just like the parchment of which the Torah is written on has reached the status of holy. So now we know that the word holy means transparent to God. That's what it means. Also, the definition of the word holy, which is something I shared with you in last week's class when we spoke about the engagement, where the groom tells the bride, Harei at mikudeshet li, you are sanctified unto me. The word kadosh So if you remember, I told you there that our sages translate the definition of the word kadosh is kadosh umuvdal, mufrash. For example, when we are commanded to take a certain portion of our produce and to make it holy, because it's one of the 24 gifts that we give the Kohen, for example. What does it mean, the word kadosh? That we should separate it from the rest of our produce. Set it aside. So to the definition of thou shalt be holy means thou shalt be set aside from the mundane, from the egocentric. So that is the definition of the word kadosh. So now when the Torah tells us Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy, we don't have this abstract, unidentified object called holy. We now have clear definition, tangible definition. Godly in the sense of transparent and submissive to the will of God, and set aside, separated from. Now, let's go ahead and look at what this practically means, because if it's a mitzvah that says thou shalt be, it needs to have a very clear description, so we should know what it means to fulfill this mitzvah. It has to have a very clear description. So Rashi, Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki, the classic 11th century commentator on the Torah, he says, he falls back on the word separation, and he says, you should be separated from sin. So the verse Kedoshim Tiyu means separated from sin. The Talmud in Yevamot, he quotes a different interpretation, and obviously Rashi not arguing on the Talmud. Rashi can't argue on the Talmud. It's later. It's just different opinions of, and they're not arguing. But he gives a deeper insight, and he says, the Talmud over there, the sage says, Kadish atzmecha b'muter lach. Sanctify yourself in that which is permissible to you. Over here we're going to have two layers. Layer number one of the definition of that Talmudic statement is basically we can fall back on a teaching which is quoted from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, and he says, and the Rebbe quotes it in his daily calendar that he wrote in 1943, Hayom Yom, and it says like this: what is forbidden is forbidden. What is permissible is unnecessary. Simply speaking, that which you could doesn't mean you have to. So that means not to overindulge. Just because it's permissible and God told us that we're allowed to, doesn't mean that, oh, that's it, that God gave me the green light and I'm going for it. Hey, calm down. If you wish. So the point that we're making here is God's telling us, calm down. I told you you could, but don't get all, there was a Hasidic saying that says, if you want to eat the meat, but do you really have to salivate on the bones? Sanctify yourself in that which is permissible to you. And now let's go to the third level. The third level of sanctify yourself in that which is permissible to you is explained as when you do something which is permissible. It's not obligatory, nor is it prohibited. But when you do something, what is your intention? Is it about the egocentric or the theocentric? So let me share with you an example. So when someone eats meat, flesh of an animal, kosher animal, made a blessing, it's all good. We're not talking about a Shabbat meal, which is obligatory, and a mitzvah, nor are we talking about a Brit Milah or a wedding, or someone is celebrating finishing an entire book of Jewish study. Those are all festive meals, which has its source in the code of Jewish law. I'm talking about a plain, simple Monday night supper. You have yourself a fine rib steak. Now, when you eat flesh of an animal, for example, it's so with everything, but I want to purposely pick this example. One of two things is going to happen when the person eats meat. One of two things has to be happening. either the animal is being elevated into the human race, or the human race is being pulled down. This person is being pulled down into the animal kingdom. And what will decide what is happening when this person is eating his meat? The intentions of what he's doing while he's eating. They're both eating, they both made a bracha, they both are only eating kosher, but one is completely focused on the tantalizing, the pleasure that's playing out on his taste buds. That person is descending into the animal kingdom. While the other person is focusing on the energy that he can get from this, the nutrients that he can get from this, to go ahead and serve God and be of service to mankind. Thus this animal, which is all now becoming nutrients and the potential and the power which the human's going to use in serving God and being of service to mankind, thus this animal became part. It was elevated into becoming part of that human service to God and to his fellow mankind. Thus we now have a very clear and tangible understanding of what this verse means according to this interpretation, this level of interpretation to the statement in the Talmud. Sanctify yourself with that which is permissible. Thus we also have a beautiful story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov once called upon his students and told them to form a circle, a meditation circle. And when the Baal Shem Tov would do that, when they prepared themselves and they went into that spiritual meditation, the Baal Shem Tov would then complete the circle, and that is how the Baal Shem Tov showed his students that which is not visible to the naked eye. And when he did that, he completed the circle, all the students suddenly saw a cow sitting with that Shabbat shtreimel hat, that beautiful Shabbat robe, and tied with that belt, the gartel belt. And they all jumped. They asked, Rebbe, what did we just see? He said, what you just saw was, on a spiritual level, what's going on at that table over there. Instead of the person focusing on the pleasure of Shabbat, singing Shabbat songs, using the meal to go ahead and become one with God, closer to God, to rejoice in God's day of rest with pleasure, Oneg Shabbat, he's making it all about how tasty and delicious and well done and juicy and the type of flavor of the meat. Thus, what you're actually seeing there is not a human being, and on that plate, it's being absorbed into the human being. You see that human being descending, and you're literally seeing a cow sitting in a shtreimel and a belt and the Shabbos clothes. Now we understand that the verse is telling us, don't let that happen. When you sit down to participate in that which is not obligatory or holy, that which is permissible, know what you're being told. You're being told that sanctify yourself. Don't become the animal, elevate the animal into you. Okay? So now we understand the simple, practical interpretation of the law, the commandment, sanctify yourself. Now we can dive into some deeper teachings in Chassidus. Now, before we dive into the deeper teaching of the Chassidus, of the details of the verse, which we're going to do, we're going to dissect this verse, literally almost every word of this verse, on a mystical level. First I want to just discuss it on a general concept. So this verse, let's read it again, right? Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. This verse needs to be read on two levels. That's what the mystical teachings tell us about this specific verse. It tells us you're to read this as a commandment, thou shalt, and you're to read it as a promise, thou will. To explain this, that mystical teachings fall back on another mystical teachings of the exact same nature upon the commandment, and you shall love God your God. And you shall love God your God, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. Read it as a commandment. God is commanding you to focus, concentrate, meditate upon God, upon the goodness of God, and upon the fact that God is your life force. And you should meditate and concentrate on this on an intellectual level, so focused until it pours over from being an intellectual understanding of the brain and becomes a tangible, warm feeling of the heart. That is the commandment of love God your God. However, the mystical teachings say, read this verse also as a promise. You will experience loving God your God. That is a very important factor. I'm not going to focus on the commandment of love God your God, because this lecture is focused on the commandment of, and you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, is holy. So I want to focus on what that means. First, you should read that verse of this week's Torah portion as a commandment. You must practice self-control. You must practice focus of the mind. You must keep your eyes on the ball. Everything we do is for a theocentric purpose. That's what it means to be holy. Then, after you focus on the abstinence of indulgence, and then that which you do is focused with a theocentric intention, once we use all our human capacity of working on becoming holy, now reread the verse as a divine promise. God is telling you a promise. You will experience what it means to be holy. So the first part is a commandment upon human effort, and the second layer of this verse is an infinite promise from God. That's very important to understand. There is a saying in Yiddish which says that he's grinding water. You know, the mill, instead of grinding flour, you're grinding water, which means you're doing nothing. You're not getting anywhere. You know, we today would have the visual of a person running on a moving sidewalk or on a treadmill. You're running and running and running and sweating. You're not getting anywhere. You're not moving distance. If we were not to have the second layer of this verse, we are threatened to work and achieve not. Thus, God's telling you, you put in all your finite human effort on acting holy, and I'm giving you my promise that you will be holy. That's how we need to read the verse. So that's another introduction. But now, let's ask a couple of questions. This class is going to be dealing with 3 questions and 3 answers. Question number 1. Just how holy is holy? How holy does holy get? That's number 1. Question number 2. How long can we hold on to holiness? Do we have momentary spurts of being holy, but then we get pulled back into the mundane human egocentric genetics? How long do we hold on to this? And the third and last question we're going to deal with is, how deep does holiness penetrate? So the question is, how holy is holy? How high does it go? Question number 2, how long can we endure holding on to holiness? And 3, how deep does it saturate, penetrate, and permeate our being? So let's deal with the questions, excuse me. So question number 1, how holy is holy? Our sages tell us that in this verse, it speaks of 3 different layers of holiness. Let's see where it is in the verse. Number 1, when it says the entire congregation of the children of Israel, that is layer number 1 of holiness. When it says you shall be holy, that's layer number 2. When it says, for I the Lord your God am holy, that's layer number 3. And we're going from bottom up. Now let's define them so we can really wrap our hands around this, our heads around this, our hearts around this. So, the first one is, we say that the first statement of holiness that it says in this verse is when it says, Kol Adat B'nai Yisrael, the entire congregation of the children of Israel. What's holy about that? So we need to understand that the first part of this commandment that God is telling us is, I want you to be who I already made you to be. I'm not asking you to achieve or to accomplish. I'm asking you to just get out of the way. Don't mess up what I already did for you. Let's get deeper into this. What does it mean a Jew is holy? What's that supposed to mean? Simply speaking, in the Talmud, we talk about the holiness of the Jewish people because of our forefathers. We are the offspring of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's talk about that. You know, the Torah talks about other holy people before Abraham, right? You have Adam. He was actually the man that was formed by the hands of God. Yitzir Kapov Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not simple. He is the actual handiwork of God. You have Noach. Noach is tzaddik. Noach found favor in the eyes of God. You have over there another one. Hashem led a certain person into the words that Hashem is Halech. Hashem walked. You have different people who reach levels of holiness. And the Torah makes note. The first person, where we don't just talk about him as an individual, but him as a lineage, is Abraham. Precisely after the story of the 3 angels that came, after the circumcision of Abraham, and they promised Abraham that God is going to give him a child, right after that, there's another story where God starts off with saying the following words. Let's read this. It says over there what? Whoa, I'm sorry, let's get this verse. For you... No. Sorry. Okay. The verse is in Genesis, and the verse says that that because he commanded his... Oh, I can't even find it in my notes. All right. God says, because he commands his children to follow in this way. So it's the first time we're going to see that God talks not just about an individual, but an inheritance from this individual to his offspring. The holiness of the Jewish people is already defined right before God gives the Torah. What does God say in Exodus? God refers to the people as a holy nation, right? He calls them a Am Segula, and he says that they are a Am Kadosh, and you shall be to me a kingdom of princes and a holy nation. So thus the first level of holiness that we speak of is the holiness that we received from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we're going to talk about that a little more when we define Kabbalistically exactly what this means. But the Jewish people are a holy people. Not because we have to sanctify ourselves, but if we just don't crass, we don't make ourselves coarse and crass, if we don't pervert ourselves, we are holy. And that's what it means when God tells the Jewish people before Mount Sinai, in the days before he gives us the Torah, that you are unto me a kingdom, a nation, a holy nation, a kingdom of princesses. Let's go to the second one. What's the second commandment? Right? This one commandment of thou shalt be holy, we're saying, our sages tell us, is really 3 parts. Number 1, be who you are. You're holy. Right? You're just going off track here for a moment, not in my notes, but just, this is a famous story. Right? So there was an orphan that was being brought up by his uncle, and as he became of age to go abroad and study, His uncle says, listen, I'm really sorry, I got caught up with a business venture. I'm not going to be able to take you to the yeshiva, but I bought you a ticket. I'll take you to the train station. You'll stand by the train, and you'll just get onto the train, and as soon as I can, I'll be there to see how you settle down. Okay. He gets onto the train, and all of a sudden he notices that everyone's holding a green ticket, and his ticket is a blue ticket. Now, in those days, it wasn't like today where you put it in the turnstile before you get onto the train. After you get on the train, they start, the guy comes around, tickets, tickets, tickets. And if you didn't have a ticket, you were removed from the train. And he's thinking to himself, oh my God, what did my uncle do? He gave me this ticket. He bought me the wrong ticket. He wasn't careful. He was so preoccupied. And he has no choice. So he goes to hide. Many times he used to hide. For those who try to take a free ride, they would hide under a chair. They would hide in the bathroom until the guy went by. And all of a sudden, this guy decides to hide, but being, not that well in the ways of thievery, the Shlomazel had his tzitzis hanging out. And the guy goes by, he sees something, he knocks on the door, open up, what? Sir, come out. Do you have a ticket? Yeah, I'm telling you, I have a ticket. I promise you I have a ticket. My uncle bought me a ticket, and I'm an orphan. I'm going to yeshiva. He's talking 90 miles per hour, stuttering. He says, can I see your ticket? And the kid takes out his ticket and shows it to the guy. He says, you foolish boy, your uncle bought you a first-class ticket. What are you hiding in the restroom of Coach? I want you to read that first part of the commandment. Be who you are. You come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're going to study later what happened and how we became holy just because we're the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But behave in accordance. Rabbi Avrohom Lipszyc, he wrote a book called My Father's Table about how his father educated him. And he says the most powerful thing his father would answer him when he asked if he can do something, he would say, sepasnish. You know what the word sepasnish means? It's Yiddish for, it isn't befitting of you. That means recognize your holiness and behave accordingly. That's the first part of this commandment. Don't obtain new holiness. Just live befitting of your innate holiness. Now let's go to the second part. The second part is a commandment that says what? You shall be holy. That already is a second level. That's telling us, don't just suffice with the holiness, the innate holiness that we have inherited from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but obtain an even deeper and greater level of holiness. That's level number 2. And then there's level number 3. Level number 3 reads, for I am holy. I means God. Now, here's a little problem. How can the sages tell us that part 3 is a commandment? Part 3 is a reason. For I am holy. The word for, key, read as because. In other words, God's telling you, why should you be holy? Because I am holy. No, our sages are saying that it's not that God is just telling us a reason why we should have innate holiness and we should obtain greater holiness, but no, he's actually commanding us, I want you to be holy as I am holy. That is a whole different infinite level of holiness. But the problem is that it isn't so. Not only it doesn't read well that this is part of the commandment, but rather this is the reason and the empowerment. But let me tell you a teaching of our sages. Our sages say in the Medrash, it says that when God says you should be holy, you may think that your holiness is as great as mine. Therefore the verse says, I am holy. And what that means is that my holiness is infinitely greater than your holiness. That means the sages extrapolate from this third commandment, thou shalt be holy, that it's actually the exact opposite of a commandment. God's telling us, you are holy, level 1. You can obtain holy, level 2. But don't think that you're going to be as holy as I, level number 3. And Jewish mysticism says no. No, you're reading it wrong. God's telling you you are holy. God's telling you you must become holier. And then God's telling you you must become on the level of I am holy. How does that fit? So I'm going to share with you how it fits. Watch how Kabbalah works. Such a simple, logical path, and yet very mystical. Why would God's being holy be a reason for me to be holy. Of course God's holy. God's God. I am not God. Thank you, God. You're holy. But I am genetically egocentric, focused primarily on my survival, on the most primitive level. And then from there I go to my indulgence, my wealth, my pleasure. So what are you telling me? Because you, God, are holy, therefore I need to be holy. So watch what Kabbalah extrapolates. So Kabbalah extrapolates that the mere fact that God's holiness is a reason for my being holy is already telling me that God's holiness I am connected to. You follow what Kabbalah just did? The exact opposite, seemingly, of what that Medrash did. The Medrash is saying it's a separation. Hey, you got holy number 1, holy number 2. Holy number 3 is I, God. Don't even think about it. But the Kabbalah is saying the exact opposite. Turn that around. The mere fact that God's saying that His being holy is a reason for our being holy is a proof that we're connected to His holiness. And thus His being holy can make us holy. Very interesting how Kabbalah twists it around. Now, let's take this to another verse. We're now going to jump to a verse in Isaiah. This verse in Isaiah we all know because we say it in our prayers every day. Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakot, U'meloch ha'aretz kivodo. Holy, 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 the God of hosts, His glory fills the world. The entire earth. Did you count? What did the verse say? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Once again, we have over here, just like in the commandment, our sages tell us that there's 3 commandments. Be who you are, innate holy, obtain greater holiness, until you then go further into the I, God, am holy. Thus too, this verse in Isaiah speaks of holy, holy, holy. Let's give a look into what's going on here in this 3 holiness the verse is talking about. So the Medrash in the homiletical teachings of the sages, the Medrash Rabbah, focused on our Torah portion and our verse and our commandment, actually brings that verse in. And it gives a very interesting metaphor. The Medrash teaches in the way of a metaphor. What's the metaphor? It says it's a mashal, a metaphor to a king whose subjects of his country, the Bnei Medina, made him 3 crowns. What did the king do? He put 1 on his head and 2 on the heads of his sons. Seems again to be what we're talking about. Holy number 1, you are, the son. Holy number 2, you can achieve, the son. Holy number 3 goes on the head of God. Now, there's 2 different opinions. When the Medrash says that the subjects of his country, who is it referring to? Let's take even the one that's more difficult. One says the Jews, so then we have a simple answer. But let's even take the one that says the angels. Why is it the angels? Angels are celestial beings. When the Medrash says the subjects of his country, it means the celestial spiritual beings. That's what it's referring to as his country. Now, they made the crown. The 2 crowns God put on his sons' heads. Who's that? You and I. Right? The prince and princesses of God. The 3rd crown he put on his head. Once again, we're struggling with that concept. How can you say that God's commanding me that I should reach that 3rd crown of holiness when I have nothing what to do with these crowns? The crowns were made by the angels. 2 crowns I'm connected to only because God put it on my head. But the 3rd crown that God put on his head, it's out of reach for me. So once again, we're struggling. You're going to see why we're focusing on this struggle and how it all fits into why prayers aren't answered and what we need to do to answer them. What I'm saying here is, I'm sharing the teaching of the Rebbe of 1964. What it's saying here is that besides the two crowns that God put on our head, the crown which went onto God's head is also connected and drawn to me. Why? So let me share with you a very interesting teaching in the Talmud. The Talmud in Chulin, I believe it is, says as follows. You should know. Yeah, it's Chulin. The Talmud in Chulin says that the angels can't begin their song until the Jew begins their prayer. I want to give you insight. Okay? How does these praises, how does how do the angels make crowns for God? What it simply means through their song of praise. The song of praise becomes the crown of God. That's the metaphor. Now, angels don't have freedom of choice. Thus, the crowns that the angels make have no preciousness. But human beings have freedom of choice. So when the human being's prayer is what initiates the angels' praise now have preciousness. Thus, the crowns that the angels make are initiated by your prayer and my prayer. Because they cannot say the words Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh until we say the words Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Thus, being that they are our reflection, they also reflect that our freedom of choice and our preciousness, and when we freely choose to pray to God. So, let's go a little further. So you now see that the crowns were made by the angels. Who empowered and initiated the process was us. So that means we initiated the process of making all three crowns. Do you see how the crown, even on God's head, is connected to us? Deeply connected to us? To the point where it's almost the work of our hands? The angels are powerless to sing praise until we freely choose to pray. So once again, even that greatest level. So when we talk about it, and there's a reason why we're going through all of this, and it's going to make sense with the next two questions. When we say that God commanded us to be holy, and then God promised us that we're going to be holy, realize what God is telling us. You are holy, level number 1. You will work and achieve, level number 2. And I am giving you, level number 3. Okay? Now, let's go further. So how high? Question number 1. How high does our holiness reach? Both the commandment and the promise. And the answer is that our holiness reaches as far as the words, for I, Lord your God, am holy. That infinite holiness of God is what God gives us. And thus we now go to the second question. How long can we endure such a holiness? How long? Guys, you remember our history? God gave us the tablets, 10 commandments. How long were we able to hold on to it before Moses had to break it in order to save us? 40 days. When you're talking about God giving us not just natural innate holiness, and not just obtainable holiness, but when God is giving us the infinite holiness of I am Lord your God, I am holy, how long can we endure that? Are we not set up to trip, fall, drop it, and crack it, and lose it? How long? Thus, we're going to go back to that same medrash which gave the metaphor, that same medrash rabbah, and talk about another piece. He says like this, The verse in Tehillim says, V'ata marom le'olam, and you are forever exalted. Say our sages in the Medrash. You noheg, you have accustomed, you have brought in holiness into your world. How do we know? Exaltedness, I'm sorry. Ata marom le'olam. You have brought exaltedness into your world. How do we know? So it counts three things. You have given Aaron eternal priesthood. That's an exaltedness. You have given King David eternal kingship for him and his dynasty. That is exaltedness. And then the last thing it says, you have made the children of Israel holy. As the verse says, you shall be holy. That is eternal exaltedness. Now tell me, why would it be eternal? God made us holy. Can't we mess it up? Right? God bought me and dressed me in this finest, beautiful suit. And then I went into the sandbox with water. Is it still fine and beautiful? God gave us, the children of Israel, Kedoshim to you. You shall be separated, you shall be transparent, you shall embody my holiness. Let's go back a second. What did we just say? Holiness number one, we can probably botch up. Holiness number two, if we don't obtain it, we lose it. Right? The mere fact that the verse tells us, step number one, would you stop hiding under the seat, acting like a puppy? Can you move up to first class? That means I could lose it. I could end up under the seat like a puppy and coach. Hiding, embarrassed of who I am, feeling that I don't deserve and I don't belong. That's what the kid was doing. Then the next commandment, obtain holiness. Well, if we don't obtain it, we lose it. The verse tells us, obtain it. Let's talk about the third holiness. God promises us that you will achieve the eternal holiness of I, your Lord, am holy. Why? So understand, when we talk about God's holiness, we need to run to a verse in Malachi. For I, your God, do not change. We'll never make God impure. We'll never make that piece of God in us impure. We may stay in the outer layers of our soul, but the essence, core piece of God in our soul, just like a fire can never become impure. The essence is untouchable. That means that why are we eternally holy? Only because God has gifted us not only with natural holiness, not only with obtainable holiness, but exalted holiness. Exalted forever. Why? Because it is the gift of a piece of I, your God, does not change. He did not change from before creation to after creation, and thus he does not change before my sin to after my sin. And that piece of God, which God has given me, level number 3 of holiness, makes my holiness eternal. Thus we talk about the prince in prison. And if the prince is in prison, he's not a prince. And when he's dressed in rags, playing in filth, in a drunken stupor, is he not the prince? I don't even know why I'm saying this right now, but it just came to my mind, so I'm going to say it. So, you know, there's always these jokes that was going on between Churchill and the madam. And Churchill was a drinker. And this woman told Churchill, "Sir Churchill, I believe you're drunk again." And Sir Churchill answered, "And you, madam, I believe are ugly. Tomorrow I'll be sober, you'll still be ugly." Not a very pretty joke, but why am I saying it? We need to understand when we mess up, what have we done? Have we genetically, biologically changed who we are? Or yes, we're drunk right now. But we will sober up, and when we do sober up, we're still who we were, are, and always will be. Because that piece of holiness within us, God's telling us, the ultimate promise is that you are going to reach the holiness of I, the Lord, which does not change, am holy. So that answers how long we can hold on to it. Because you know what I just told you? You don't need to hold on to it. God gave it to you. Now, the final question then would have to be, how deep does this holiness go? The minute you talk about infinite, encompassing, you automatically, seemingly created an abstract relationship between you and it. Because you can't put an encompassing circle into a line. Thus, how deep does this go? Is it that a Jew at a gifted moment has this unbelievable revelation, epiphany of holiness, and he says, no, I cannot betray my God. I must die and not bow to the cross, or whatever it was in those days. Right? By the altar de fe, it was with the cross. You had Jews that maybe didn't keep kosher, but they didn't bow to the cross and convert. They died. Why? Because there's this abstract holiness in a Jew that just says, play. You want to play, play. But don't cross the line. You are who you are. So that's an abstract thing that only, you ever saw those little pieces of glass, in case of emergency, break glass? Is that the holiness we have? In a glass casing? Abstract? But in case of emergency, break glass. Or does this holiness penetrate, permeate? Does it actually seep through all my layers? That it's no more abstract behind the glass, but it actually manifests itself in how I think, in how I feel, what I say, and what I do. That's the question, the last question. Because if we took this into an eternal, exalted, infinite, we kind of distance ourselves from it. Epiphanies, in case of emergencies, but not something you and I can actually make concrete decisions of how honest we're going to be, how well behaved we're going to be. So that's the last question. To understand this question, I want to go back now to the three holinesses and make them clear. Holiness number one, I told you, is innate. Why is it innate? I told you because only Abraham was the first person who God said, I'm not choosing an individual, but because he has commanded his children to walk in his way, his holiness had become an inheritance. In the world of Kabbalah, what that means is that what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob assured by not just creating an individual holiness, but in creating a lineage of holiness, they have ascertained that every single soul of every single Jew, from the highest Moses to the lowest water carrier, every single one of them has a soul which is rooted in the 10 emanations of holiness. Now, it may be like an onion. There may be layers and layers and layers and layers. What do we say? Oh, deep, 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 deep down, he's good. But that's a fact. Deep, 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 deep down, you're going to hit a well. Because the soul comes from the 10 emanations of holiness. Thus, the innate holiness that we have is simply of the spiritual inheritance that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob gave us. Let's get a little more detailed. Who was Abraham? Which emanation? We know that Abraham was love, which is the emanation of kindness. Who was Isaac? Isaac was the emotion emanation of awe. Comes from the second emanation, the emotion emanation of strictness and strength. Jacob was the emotion emanation of compassion, which comes from the third emotion emanation of splendor, Tiferet. Thus, when we talk about the innate holiness of a Jew, simply because he inherited this spiritual inheritance from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What are we talking about? We're talking about the three primary emotion emanations of holiness. Let's take it one step further. In Kabbalah, when we talk about the emotion emanations, we're talking about out of 10 emanations, there's 3 higher intellects, which are called the 3 heads, and then we call the 3 lower emotion emanations. Why do we call them lower? Because they have less revelation and divinity. The light is weaker and the vessel is thicker. Thus, in Kabbalah, we refer to the emotion emanations as Zah. The word Zah is an acronym for 2 words. Zeir Anpin, small faces. Because it is smaller than the intellect emanations. When we talk about the innate holiness of a Jew, the innate holiness of a Jew is that his love, his fear, his awe, and his compassion is innately transparent to God. That doesn't mean we can't go astray in our behaviors, but genetically, innately, if we don't perverse who we are, if we don't cover ourselves in mud, what you're going to see is a human being, a man or a woman, who innately loves God, has awe for God, and is filled with compassion for all of God's creatures, including himself or herself. Now let's go to the next step. The next step says what? The next step says, you shall be holy. That means that besides the innate holiness, we need to obtain a holiness greater than our innate holiness. In the world of Kabbalah, we define this as the crown of splendor. Now, a crown is circular. Emanations are linear. Thus, the infinite circular crown, which hovers upon the head of the small faces, the emotion emanations, is obtainable. Because that crown belongs to this head. But you need to obtain it. It's not your genetic build. You got to take the crown and put it on. That's the work of you shall be holy. It's not enough just not to cover yourself in mud, but you have to go to the next step. Make sure it's progressive, it evolves, and you reach up to the crown and place it on your head. The third level of for I, God, am holy, in Kabbalah, that refers to the ultimate supernal crown upon long faces. Why long faces? The opposite of small faces. Small faces is smaller permeating light. Long faces is the infinite greatness of light. Thus this refers to the infinite supernal crown of God. As we spoke about, and God placed that crown on his head. Now that you have this definition, I want to answer the question. How deep does our holiness go? How deep does it go? Is it just an abstract emergency parachute not to be used when you're walking down the street? Or is it a holiness that defines the way we walk, defines the way we talk, defines the way we eat, defines the way we think? So now that you understand the 3 crowns, how it goes higher and higher, now let's take it down. Let's go deeper and deeper. I want to one last time walk with you through this verse and dissect its words. Okay? So let's go through it. The first thing I want to tell you is the word congregation. Adat b'nei Yisrael. Which is very interesting. Most of the times the verse says that God told Moses, speak to the children of Israel. It doesn't say speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel. It's kind of extra words. Speak to the children of Israel. So my friends, what is the smallest legal congregation you find in Jewish law? A minyan. How much is a minyan? 10. So which emanation are we talking about? The 10th emanation. The 10th faculty of the Jew. Which is kingship. Which practically means thought, speech, and action. Let's go to the next word. Israel. Who is Israel, we said? Israel is who? We said Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's inheritance. That is the primary three emotion emanations. Our feelings of love, fear, awe, and compassion. What does it mean, the children of Israel? We're dissecting every word. We want to see how far down this holiness goes. Is it locked in a safe? Oh, you're a multimillionaire because you inherited a safe with an unbelievable gem in it, but you just didn't inherit the number to the safe. So yeah, on paper, you're a billionaire. That's not what we want here. We want a holiness that we can open the safe, take it, live off it, think from it, feel from it. So therefore, with going deeper, children of Israel means the offspring of the three primary emotions. So the three primary emotions of the soul is love, fear, awe, and compassion. What are their offsprings? I'll tell you what it is. The offspring is endurance, gratitude, and commitment. Thus we now see that the holiness is not just in the heart. How many Jews say, I'm a good Jew at heart? I don't have the endurance to do what I'm supposed to do. I don't have the commitment. I lack in the practical gratitude of making a blessing before everything I eat. But really, is that what a Jew is all about? I'm a Jew at heart. Children of Israel. Not only children of Israel, congregation of the children of Israel. Not only do you have to be a good Jew in heart, you have to be a good Jew in practical endurance, in practical gratitude, in practical commitment, and in practical kingship of your thought, speech, and action. And then remember, what holiness permeates all the way down to our practical day-to-day thought, speech, and action? The ultimate holiness of I, God your Lord, am holy. Thus you now see that this law, this commandment that we're talking about of thou shalt be holy, right? This commandment, you shall be holy, it goes from the depths of who you are, which means you can't mess it up. It means it's yours forever. And it also means that it affects, not like us locked up in a vault, but it affects the way we walk, talk, feel, and think. So this commandment of you are holy is a commandment, a promise of the ultimate experience of the greatest heights to the innate nature to the obtainable. And all of that practically affects how we live our life. So that was the mystical teaching. I'm going to wrap it up one more time, even though I told I'm very repetitious. I want to say it again so we can get into the practical, why don't our prayers get answered? So we spoke about 3 levels of holiness. The holiness of you are holy. Just be who you are. You can obtain greater holiness. Reach up. You were gifted the eternal, infinite, ultimate holiness of you are, I, God, your Lord, am holy. That's what breathes within us. That's the neshama of every heartbeat. Now let's get to the closing. In closing, let us now return to the opening issue. Why, most often, do our prayers go unanswered? And we said in that metaphor that the reason is because we nudge. If we would stop nudging, God would gladly answer all our prayers. What are we talking about? So what does this mean? What you just heard me give an entire lecture upon is the fact that we are innately holy, we obtain holiness, and we are the ultimate holiness of being a piece of God, a child of God. We spoke about this holiness that we carry within ourselves is the ultimate, unconditionally loved, cherished, and cared for by God. So now, let me ask you a question. But be honest. I need each and every one of us for a moment to be really brutally honest with ourselves. When you and I pray, How often do we think that the job of prayer is to convince God? What am I praying? I'm praying because obviously God doesn't want me to have it. The proof that he doesn't want me to have it is that I don't have it. So I'm going to pray and I'm going to convince God to change his mind. You don't want to give it to me, but I'm going to convince you to the point of beyond reasonable doubt that you should give it to me. Wow. I just told God that you really don't want to give this to me. And I have to change your mind. You understand what nudging means? That's called nudging. The mere fact that I am coming from this mindset that God doesn't want to give it to me, and I have to convince God and not give up and not stop praying until I successfully change God's mind from what he doesn't want to now want. Do you realize what that's saying? That means I'm a nudnik. God doesn't want to, and I'm going to nudge him until he wants to. Now, what's the problem with that? So what? So what? So I have this paradigm that God doesn't want to give it to me. And I have to convince him to give it to me. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. What's wrong with that is the minute you come to God with a mindset that you don't want to give it to me, and I have to now embark upon this incredible task of changing your mind, I have already defined that my prayer deserves to go unanswered. Now the question is if I can superhumanly change God's mind. Thus, by coming with that type of prayer, where I'm begging you, God, that even though you don't want to, please, anyway, just a little bit, give me a chance. What do you care? By saying those words, I've already defined that my prayer deserves to go unanswered unless I can somehow change God's mind. Thus, most answers, when we're nudniks, that nudge God, because we have imposed upon God, you don't want, but I'm going to nudge you. I'm going to try to convince you. Right there, we close the door on having our prayers answered. Why are we imposing upon God that you don't want to? And the fact that you don't want to is proven by that I don't have it. But I'm going to change your mind. Why come that way? So people, let's be very clear. The job of prayer is not to convince God. Don't waste your time. Why would you have to convince God to want to be good to you? So cut it out. When you stand and you pray, please Hashem, please Hashem. What please Hashem? You know, when you ask someone, so you're going to come tomorrow to the minyan? They answer, God's willing. Of course God's willing. I need to know if you're willing. That's what prayer is about. Prayer is not about God's willing. It's a fact that God is good. God has made me innately holy, obtainable holy, and eternally, infinitely, unconditionally holy. So don't tell me God willing. God wills. God wills for me to have everything I pray for. The question is, am I open to let God's infinite love and goodness into me? That's what prayer is all about. Prayer is not working on God. You don't need to work God over. Prayer is about working ourselves over. Let's be more practical here. What prayer is meant to do is to make a huge paradigm shift from my paradigm of egocentric self-reliance. Be with me for a moment. Hear what I'm saying. The mere fact that you think that you're going to change God's mind is already a statement of self-reliance. Oh, don't worry. I know how to pray. I'm gonna convince God. Stop it. The whole job of prayer is to stop with the egocentric self-reliance. I can, I will, just let me talk to God. You'll see. No. The job of prayer is to become humble and open to God's undeserved grace of unconditional love, holiness, and goodness that He wants to give me. What a paradigm shift. What a total paradigm shift. And the reason why our prayers primarily go unanswered is because deep down, every single one of us sitting by this table enter into prayer with the notion that we're going to arouse God, we're going to convince God, we're going to get God to change His mind. How many, what's that song? I'm going to make you love me. You don't love me, God, but I'm going to make you love me. Egocentric self-reliance, which is so perverse. My friends, God does love us. And we got to get out of the way. We got to get out of the way of His loving us. Stop telling Him that you're going to love me because I am going to be good. Rather, let God tell us, I love you because you are unconditionally a piece of me. And thus, let's stop coming as a servant to a king, begging for the slightest pauper's grace. And let us come as a prince, princess to our Father. When we can move our egocentric self-reliance of I'm going to work God over, even if I have to get on my knees and cry like a baby. When we can get past that and say, you know what? Prayer isn't about who I'm talking to. Prayer is about who's talking. Can I really open up and talk to God? Can I really open up and listen to God? Can I get the my willing open enough for God's willing? Those prayers get answered. Thank you.